Perek Chaf Zayin of Sefer Breisheet, Parsha Toldot. Here we are. We're up to the brachot. We're starting the new season at this juncture. Of course, what's past is prologue, as the Bard pointed out. So we have a lot of prologue to go on. But let's just start with the psukim here. And of course, then we'll contextualize it against the backdrop of, oh, nice to see you, Rosalie. Nice to see you, Karen. Everyone else is here. Still nice to see your faces. I acknowledged Jean earlier. So the beginning here, just to get a little bit into the mikra, into reading some of the words of the Torah, and then we'll try to understand a bit of a deeper level with our questions and our issues. Level of pshat. Vayihi ki zaken Yitzchak vatichena einav mirot vayikra et Esav beno agadol v'mer elav beni v'mer elav hineni. In one pasuk, a tremendous amount of information. By the by, it's a natural breaking point, unlike some of the prakim that are totally artificial. The numbers of chapters are artificial. Here, if you look in the Sefer Torah and in the version of the Chumash that I'm using, there's actually a space. It's not entirely a new story, but it is a new episode, which tells us that it could be 5 minutes after what happened before, or it could be 20 years after what happened before. It doesn't tell us definitively how much time has elapsed. Vayihi, behold, right? And so it was, as Yitzchak was older and his eyes dimmed from seeing, from sight. Before we get to Midrashim, before we get to Rashi or any of the other Mefarshim, it just says, behold, he was old, and on account of the fact that he was old and his eyes grew dim, just very, very directly, he's old. I mean, here I'm already quoting from Rashbam, but Min HaZikna, that's what happens. People get older, their eyesight starts to go. That's what happened. We'll understand other layers of meaning at the level of Medrash, etc., Remez, whatever we're going to do here. But first, Pshat, that's what happened. He called his son, and has to remind us that his son is the bigger son. Really means here the elder son. I don't think it's an issue of size, right? It's really an issue of age in some way, even though he's a twin. And he says to him, son, and he answers, Hineni, reminiscent of other stories in Breisheet, for sure, right? Vayomer, by here it's the father calling out to his son, right? There's a very short dialogue that we have also. Vayomer elav, Vayomer elav Hineni, yeah? So in that other edition, when it goes in the other direction, it's a father being called by his son, and the father responding with love and tenderness, right? And here, the father calls out to his son by calling him son, and the son just says, I'm here. Vayomer, Hinei na zakanti, lo yadati yom moti. Once again, something about mortality. We have about the age of Yitzchak in Pasuk Aleph, Perek Chav Zayin Pasuk Aleph. Pasuk Bet, the opening piece before the request is, and anything about brachas that we know is coming, we have first, I'm old and I don't know when I'll die. A feeling of encroaching awareness of mortality, maybe of mortality itself. He doesn't see as well as he used to. Ve'ata, and now with an ayin, san na chelecha tel yicha ve'kashtecha v'tzeh asedeh v'tzuda li tzayid. Take your tools, right? Your various weapons, your bow, and go out to the field and hunt something for me. Of course, related very much to what we had at the beginning of Parshat Toldot in our last season, again, with regard to Kitzayid Befiv, it was hunt in his mouth. And on the level of Pshat, he liked the food that he brought, that he made. Don't bring it to me raw, cook it. Make for me delectables, delicious food. Kasher ahavti, as I love. Vehavia li ve'ochela. Bring it to me and I will eat. Ba'avur tivarecha nafshi b'terem amut. So that my soul may bless you before I die. We're up to 2 references to death. And the bringing of the food is so that my soul will bless you. What is that? So that I'll be in a good mood, so that you'll earn it, so that you'll have a merit of fulfilling the mitzvah of Kibud Av V'Em. Now we're just learning on the level of pshat here. So for those of us who have all of our preconceived notions, which may be accurate, but we have a lot of ideas about the wickedness of Esav, about the darkness of Esav. I'm asking you for now to open the story with fresh eyes. A father's telling his son, I want to give you a bracha, bring me food. And make the food good and delicious, as you know that I love the food that you make, right? So before we get into any issues, and we discussed in the last season rather, we discussed at length, right, varying views of Esav, right? And on the level of Pshat, we saw that there were certain indications that he was doing things that were a source of embitterment to his parents, things that disapproved of. Chazal have a tradition that Esav is actually incredibly wicked and that it's not mentioned on the level of Pshat. And we tried to ask the question, why do Chazal go in that direction? An easy answer is because that's the tradition, that's the reality of it. But if we do go down that road, then we have to answer another question, which is, why isn't it in the Pshat? Why is it hidden away from the Pshat? We came up with some ideas, whether it's to shield the legacy of Yitzchak and Rivka, whether it's the reality that it was a much more complicated story, whether it was to show that Esav himself was incredibly cunning and perhaps duplicitous of his own parents, and therefore, or at least of his father. His mother saw through it. There's something going on there as well. But just in this little piece of what we have that we've just learned, not what's coming next, not the psukim hey and onward, just these 3-4 psukim that we just 4 psukim. I think there's a lot for us to discuss. Let's try to focus on this. And I'm curious and interested to hear people's questions. I see Shelly already has her hand up. Karen has her hand up. So good morning, Shelly. And let's hear what you have to say.
Okay, my question is, I don't know if you call it historical, archaeological. I believe that in these particular times all over Mesopotamia, the eating of food led to a covenant or a contract or something like that. You couldn't have it without. So therefore, whatever Yitzchak is going to do with Esav is going to be after this food. The food is also important way back in the story with Yaakov and Esav with the lentils.
The soup. With the soup. That's what you're referring to? Jelly, I lost you. I think you meant the soup, yeah? The lentil soup from back in that story. Sorry, I'm not getting your audio anymore, but I think I got the gist of it. I don't know that every single time a meal transpired, it was always a covenant, particularly when it was within a family context. People did eat. What happens there, of course, is that if it does become transactional or whatever you want to call it, which is a feature. So there might be something covenantal that's going on here. In fact, he wants to give him brachas. There's something in those brachas, clearly.
We bless children before the Friday night Shabbat meal. There is something even in our tradition, let alone the surrounding Mediterranean tradition of food and.
Yeah, agreed. And think of our many meals that we have that are celebrational, but have a religious component to the celebration, as we're sitting in the presence of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, whether it's a Seder or whatever it is, right? Or any meal with washing, benching, and Zmirot, Divrei Torah, etc. So Yom Tov meals, it's a chiyuv to eat a Yom Tov meal too, in fact, and one at night, one during the day. So all of these are related. They're all related. I'm not sure. Are you asking the question? Was there a covenant that was going to be forged here that was then ruined? I mean, is a bracha a covenant? Bracha is a bracha, covenant's a covenant. That there's certainly a tradition of giving brachot has a very long and storied history.
But the bracha here is going to be something that cannot be taken back. It's not like the kinds of brachas that we.
Okay. Agreed. That's something here we'll have to explore. I agreed. Let me take some other questions, comments. Karen, please.
Okay, I'm going to put a nice spin on this just because I'm
Why
going to put a nice spin on it. And it's something that I think will resonate to some of the other people in class. And that is, if you've ever been in the position of being the caregiver to a parent at the end of their life, it's exhausting, it's difficult, and only later do you realize that it was their last gift to you, to allow you to do a mitzvah in the best way possible for them. So I'm going to say, okay, Yitzchak is a tzaddik, and maybe part of what is going on here is he is offering this son who's been troublesome an opportunity to be kind, to be generous, to bring the best of himself out.
Excellent. And by the way, it's something that he excels at.
Yes, exactly. He picked the thing that his son could do to allow him to do this.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just a nice spin on it. There's
I think there is something there. By the by, it does help us understand Yitzchak's blindness. I don't mean the physical component, but maybe the, is it that he didn't know anything what his son was really about? Or was that he was saying, I have a role for you. I have something you need to do. You're not going to excel in the Beit Midrash, but that's not the only barometer of, of being a good Jew, a good member of our family. And so I have a job for you. I want something you want you to do. And by the by, in the tradition of Avram Avinu, according to the Medrash, when the three guests come, Avram's very wealthy, but he still turns to Yishmael, and he gets Yishmael involved in the mitzvah of Achnasat Orchim. Why? Because he wants to be mechanechem in mitzvot. So here, maybe that is what it is. It's sort of like, there are many times I'm sure that Esav brought the food home, but now his father told him, this one's going to be really special, because for this one, there's going to be a bracha waiting for you, at the end. At the end of what's going to happen, of the story. So I think this is an opportunity for us now to try to explore this a little bit deeper. So along these lines, Shelley, do you have your hand up again, or is that the hand from before?
Sorry, I didn't from before.
Oh, okay, yeah, fine. So if you look with me, just here's an example. Rashbam, he just says, oh, he's old. That's what happens. And there's a quote at the beginning of Sefer Shmuel that Eli, remember Eli HaKohen, that his eyes also started to dim. His eyes also started to dim. Now, what's interesting is that's all that is said by Rashbam. He's old, pshat. Person gets old, that's what happens. There's no other meaning. There's no other reason why this happens. It's not about a story that came before. It's just in the moment. The Torah is telling us that his eyes, what happened to them is what happens to the eyes of many people. And I'll tell you that there is an analog elsewhere in Tanakh where the same language is used, ve'inav hechelu kehot, with regard to Eli. And he just stops there. But you don't have to be a rocket scientist, I don't think, to think a little more. For those of us who were in a Navi class together years ago when we were at Shmuel Aleph, we're up to Malachim Aleph, which will resume, God willing, later this week. Everyone's invited, 9:30 a.m. in person or on Zoom if you can't make it in person. What was the story with Eli and his kids? Remember? Just offhand, you remember? Faith, go ahead. Faith, go ahead. In person, Faith. Right. He seemed to also not be entirely aware that they were not following in his footsteps, that there was something corrupted about them, about their behavior. Now, Rashbam says nothing about this. He just tells you, oh, there's also another pasuk where this comes up in Tanakh. But, to draw a line between those two dots is not such a stretch, right? So along comes the Sforno, and he directly draws that line. Sforno says it's what happened to Eli, shelo bicha bebanav, that he did not appropriately rebuke his children, as it says. And the language, and this is amazing, the Sforno doesn't quote the same pasuk from Sefer Shmuel Aleph that is quoted by Rashbam. Rashbam says, "Ve'inav hechelu kehot," the eyes of Eli began to dim. Shmuel Aleph, chapter 3. Rather, Sforno quotes from chapter 3, not verse 2, but verse 13. Velo kehebam. Velo kehebam in the expression that it exists here, he did not rebuke them for their actions that were inappropriate. So whereas Rashbam may or may not be hinting to it, Sforno just comes out and says it. Now, according to Sforno's reading, the point is there is something here about Yitzchak not seeing or not wanting to see what other people could very readily see, like the last to know, that sometimes the people closest in. Yeah, we don't have this with regard to Yaakov, even though it will say ve'einav kavdu mizoken, his sight grew heavy from old age. It does not use the word vatichena, which means somehow a blurring of sight, some such thing. So and by the way, Avram and Yaakov were even older than Yitzchak is in this story, and older than Eli is in his story, right? So, it's just interesting that even with the Einav Kavdu Mizoken, that his eyesight, Yaakov's eyesight was diminished, we also learned that he's able to see the children of Yosef. So he still is able to see something. And he has to draw them close, but he can see them. But with Esav, Yitzchak didn't see it. Yeah, even though it was harder for him. The idea that Sforno, I think, is telling us about, without saying it outright, is there is some kind of a failure. It might not be a moral failure. It might just be a reality of an inability to see what had happened to his son. Now, is Sforno claiming that Yitzchak's eyesight is actually 20/20? No. But the point is that the language that's used here and what runs as a theme throughout the story is about a lack of vision, an ability to see. And it's not merely in the sense of the ocular faculty. There's something else that's going on. So that's you have Rashbam versus Sforno. Other, I'm not giving everybody, but that's other Parshanei Mikra also going in this direction. Radak, by contrast, thinks no, the same way that Yitzchak lost his vision in some way or was challenged, so did Yaakov. That's what happens to people when they get older. Most older people, they have trouble seeing and hearing, right? And sometimes, though, they get old more quickly. Why was Yitzchak losing his eyesight earlier than other people, 20 years plus before he died? Why did some people get cataracts when they're young and some people never get cataracts? How come? I don't know. So he didn't know. But since it was generally associated with old age, once Yitzchak saw that something was happening to his vision, he grew more concerned about his mortality. His awareness of mortality was sharpened. And therefore, he called to Esav to give him a bracha before he died. Yeah. And it could be, says the Radak, that the reason why Yitzchak's eyes were cloudy or his vision was occluded or he was blind, with any of those, it could be, is just Misuriyat Tzadikim. Sometimes Tzadikim suffer. In other words, Radak connects it to his righteousness, but he says, what's the reason? The reason is maybe, because he's a tzaddik. And sometimes tzaddikim suffer in this world. And therefore, this story arrives to tell us that sometimes God brings suffering to some tzaddikim in this world, according to what Hashem wants to do, according to his wisdom, his divine wisdom. Okay? And so it is. That's the Radak. He also mentions after he tells you the Pshat, a medrash that Rashi had already quoted. So we'll go back to Rashi and see it there. Rashi wants to understand, is there a causal link between, relatively speaking, a premature blindness and what transpired right before this? Maybe something related to Esav. Well, wouldn't you know, the story right before is about Esav's wives and that they're in the house and they're a source of embitterment, right? So Tichena Einav, Rashi didn't make this up, we quoted right out of the Medrash Tanchuma, Ba'ashanan Shel Elu. They are offering offerings to idolatry. They're burning incense, whatever they're doing. They're creating smoke, and the smoke is a smoke screen, and it negatively impacts the spiritual abilities and therefore the physical faculties of Yitzchak Avinu. Why not Rivka Imenu? Right? So the Medrash is further quoted by Chizkuni. And what does he say? From Breisheet Rabbah, she was accustomed to this kind of existence because she came from a house where that happened all the time. She knew how to smell the chazer schmaltz and it didn't affect her because she wasn't from a rarefied atmosphere of Kedusha. She was amazing and that made her more amazing, but she had a certain resistance to it. But the delicate soul of a Yitzchak Avinu could not abide the smoke rings that were being sent up by these women, and it impacted him. Again, you can take that within the world of Medrash literally, i.e., literally in their house, there was this smell, and there was a wafting, aroma and smoke, and the smoke went in his eyes, and he could not see. Or you could understand that the smoke was also blinding him to the reality of what was transpiring actually with his son. Yeah, the Ashan. Maybe there was being explained away as serving Hashem, whatever the issue. Yeah, he just wasn't wise to it. He didn't understand it. Why? Because he had already admitted some part of the smoke that was Esav. Right. So that's one. There are three ideas in Rashi. I just gave you the first of three, but just to sort of mull it over. And Radak is willing to say there is a medrash like this, that they were makatrot, and therefore, because they were makatrot, means they were burning to their idols. So that caused Yitzchak's eyes to be impacted. Okay, Shelley had a hand up, and he put it back down. You want me to say ideas 2 and 3 in Rashi first?
I'm sorry. Chazal who don't like Esav are always, I was putting him down. They have him as a hypocrite. He's a pig showing his split hooves, or whatever. Okay, so therefore, if this is how they think of him, he's not going to let his wives. He's not going to let his wives do stuff in front of his father. He's whatever he thinks. Even Chazal says.
Yeah. The Medrash, I believe, I don't have it in front of me right now. I'm pretty sure the Medrash claims that when Yitzchak would smell it, say, "What is that?" He would say, "They're so religious, they're serving Hashem," but really they were serving idolatry. It was the same incense.
But then why would the smoke affect his eyes if he really thought that they were doing it to Hashem?
God, to Hashem, because Yitzchak was, and from a spiritual vantage point, very sensitive. The point of Rashi here, quoting from the Medrash, is he was impacted negatively by having this phenomenon go on under his nose, or really in his nose, or in his face, even though it might have been part of the smoke screen. They said, "Oh, it's about serving Hashem," but really it wasn't. It was idolatry.
Okay.
Again, I don't think in the world of Medrash, I've said it many times, you don't have to necessarily take the Medrash literally.
Okay, but then
literally smoke went in his eyes. I can't see. It could be his eyes dimmed, but his eyes dimmed is not unrelated to the fact that there was smoke in the house. Smoke that prevented people from seeing things.
Okay, let's say that he buys Esav's story. Rivka has never bought anything about Esav. She hasn't liked him since before he was born. Okay, she's not going to tell her husband that this is what's really going on. So we
didn't get to Rivka yet in the story. You're right, but that's why I was careful to say verses 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's a verse 5 discussion. We're gonna need like a whole shiur just on that, right? We'll have to get to it. You're absolutely right. You didn't say anything. I'm not sure I'm going to agree with your characterization now or then that she didn't like Esav in utero, or that she didn't like Esav altogether, or she hated him. Nechama Leibowitz has another idea about this, which we'll get to when we get to farther along in the story. I urge you to reserve judgment about that. And we'll go back and see it more in context. I don't want to go down that road now because I haven't even invoked Rivka's Imenu's name yet. We're just focused on the first few psukim. So I'm bringing us back to that. The point of Rashi is, the point of the Medrash, one idea, which by the way, there is one, maybe two davar acher clauses in this Rashi, first Rashi in Perek Chav Zayin. But the first one at least says this didn't happen in a vacuum, that his eyesight went. Rashbam, you can just imagine grandson sitting with grandfather saying to him, Zaidi, people get old. There's nothing else going on here. He got old. You know who else got old? Eli got old. And by the by, it's the same word that is used for Eli. This is this Forno coming into the room, you could imagine, centuries later, mind you. Excuse me. I love that you quoted from the book of Shmuel. Do you see a parallel between Eli and his sons and Yitzchak and his son? I do. And you know how I know there's actually something to it? Because further along at the end of this book that we're in now, in Breisheet, we're going to have a story about Yaakov Avinu. And the story about Yaakov Avinu is going to also be an eyesight issue. And when that transpires, you know what? He's still going to be able to see through it. Even though Kavdum is enough, Kavdum is Zoken, he's going to call them close, can't see things at a distance. He sees them close. Oh, he sees the children of Yosef. He does eventually identify them. So you have this dialogue. So Rashi could say back to, Radak, and maybe to Sforno as well. Yitzchak is trying to be accommodating, but the pshat, Pasuk Lamed Hey, in the last parak was Vatiyena Morat Ruach Litzchak L'Rivka. Was the embitterment the fact that he married them? We talked last season, not going back to you got to listen to that shir if you're interested. What was the source of the embitterment? But at least as far as Rashi was concerned, it was the fact that when they brought them into the house, they were doing idolatry in the house. And that was a source of embitterment. Is that embitterment because they didn't understand that it was idolatry, or because they did understand it was idolatry? When you get to Rashi, the beginning of this parak, the smoke blinds Yitzchak's ability to see. Was it that they had pulled the wool or the smoke over his eyes, that put smoke in his eyes? Or is it that it had a deleterious impact because he knew, but he somehow abetted it happening? That's one possibility. Whenever you see davar acher in Rashi, it means that there is an inherent and unacknowledged, but acknowledged by Rashi probably, but he doesn't say what it is, a certain weakness in that interpretation, which another interpretation, the other side of a davar acher, another idea, another matter, another interpretation is possibly going to compensate for. That other interpretation will also have a point of weakness that perhaps the first one will compensate for. We have another layer of complexity we have to address, though, and it's methodological, and that has to do with manuscripts. Rashi didn't have a printing press, obviously. I mean, the man died in 1105. Give him a break. It wasn't invented yet. So Rashi's writing, and he's copying, and people are copying Rashi's work. And the Talmidim who want to have a Rashi have to copy what he wrote, what the Rebbe wrote. But as they're copying down what the Rebbe wrote, they're writing in the margin. And sometimes in later generations, you can't tell if the marginalia are by the original author or by somebody else. Why? Because it's all in the same handwriting. The Talmud wrote what his Rebbe wrote, and then he put a little asterisk and he wrote a note on the side. What can you do? So what we have is what's called Tfus Rishon. Tfus Rishon means original manuscript. The first time it was printed in a printing press, not the original manuscript, excuse me, the first printing that happens. So when you get to first printings, now you can see, doesn't tell you what the first manuscript was, but it does give you a window into something that's happening, right? About maybe what one of the early manuscripts had or didn't have in it. So you have all these Talmidim with different manuscripts, yeah, and one of them becomes the manuscript, or a few of them actually usually did like a composite to figure out what to put into the printed text. So the great revolution of the printing press for us is in fact a certain standardization of what's in and what's out, right? In Defus Rishon, the first printing, the next Davar Acher does not appear. So in Defus Rishon, the original printing, and by the by, in the Torat Chaim edition from Osada Rav Kook, their edition of the Chumash that I'm using this morning, actually says not just Defus Rishon, but also a number of Kitvei Yad, of handwritten manuscripts, are also missing this second of three interpretations. So in Defus Rishon, in many manuscripts, we have two things. We have number one, Ba'ashanan shel elu, by the smoke of these ones, meaning these ones, the ladies who were brought into the house, who were bringing idolatry into the house. Smoke got into his eyes and it negatively impacted him. That's interpretation one. Interpretation number three, which is in the Defus Rishon in many manuscripts, is Kadesh Yito Yaakov et brachot, so that Yaakov will be able to get the brachot. Yitzchak loses his eyesight not because of something that someone else did. Hashem caused it to happen directly and exclusively. And why? Because of a necessity of a story that's happening. If Yitzchak was not blind physically, he would have not been able to give the bracha to Yaakov, because he would have seen that it was Yaakov who came in, and therefore he would have only given the bracha to Esav. He would not have given it to Yaakov. In the first answer, we're connecting what we're hearing now with what we heard just before. And in the third answer, may I ask the direct question? Helen, unless you're answering directly, just hold that thought, because I want to ask this question.
Sure.
And with this answer, in the third interpretation, all right, what's the strength and what's the weakness of saying that the reason why Yitzchak's eyes did not function properly anymore was so that Yaakov would get the brachas? What do you think? There's an advantage to what Rashi's saying in this interpretation, but also a weakness. Shelley, go ahead.
There's nothing that says that Yaakov couldn't get the blessing. Yishmael is a first son. Okay, you can say that these have the same mother, but still they're pretty much twins. It's whatever works better on how you're going to transmit the thing. The thing in the future. Did Esav really want to do this? As opposed, maybe he wanted the power, but he didn't necessarily. He may have wanted to be acknowledged as the elder, but he didn't necessarily
want the responsibilities that came with it. It wasn't them.
So I don't see where you'd have to give the bracha of the spiritual going forth in the family to a kid that's a couple minutes older than the other kid.
Right. They weren't 15 or 20 or 30 years apart. They were like 10 minutes apart or something. Right. And yet, so just to follow what you're saying through to its logical conclusion, according to this third interpretation, the Ribono Sha'olam decided to remove someone's ability to see so that the bracha would get to Yaakov and not to Esav. And it's not about something that Esav or his wives did, right? I'm leading you a little bit too far, maybe. In the first answer, why is Yitzchak blind? Whose fault is it really that Yitzchak's blind? Maybe Esav, maybe Esav's wives, maybe Yitzchak himself. But you know whose fault it's not? It's not Hashem's fault. It's not a fault. Hashem didn't do it. I mean, obviously, God controls the whole world. Okay. But we also have a hand in what happens. And you could say, everything's in the hands of heaven, except for the fear of heaven, which encompasses everything having to do with Yirat Shamayim, ethics, morality, spirituality. It's all under the rubric of Yirat Shamayim, a fear of heaven. Doing the right thing because there's a God in the world. Not doing the wrong thing because there's a God in the world. In the first answer, the reason why Yitzchak Avinu no longer has sight is, unfortunately, there are casualties to the negative actions that people perpetrate, or the good things that they fail to do. But in this other interpretation, again, I skipped number 2. I went straight for number 3. You know why he's blind? Because Ribono Shalom sees everything that's going to happen in the world. Because Ribono Shalom knows Yitzchak better than Yitzchak knows himself. Because Ribono Shalom sees that if Yitzchak Avinu will have his vision intact, he's actually really going to give the bracha to Esav, because he fundamentally believes that, a few minutes older though he may be, he has something that is redemptive about him. And if I give him the bracha, I'll complete that redemptive process. I'll give him I'll let him stand at the head of the class and write with I would have said the chalk on the blackboard today. I don't know what we would say on the smart board, so that he'll feel special. And when he feels special, he'll be deserving of a bracha because he will really be special. And then, you know what? He'll carry out his grand mission that he has to carry out. And then Yaakov will get whatever bracha he's supposed to get. But this is the destiny that's supposed to happen. So the Ribono Shel Olam, not Rivka Imenu, first Hashem is orchestrating things in a certain way. It's not related to Esav. It's not related to his wives. Why did he lose his eyesight? It has nothing to do with anybody in their smoke. It has only to do with one thing. Ribono Shel Olam decided, Yitzchak, I have to take away your vision earlier than I normally would, so that you will think more about mortality, but also, and therefore you want to give the bracha, but also especially so that the bracha will not get to Esav, it'll get to Yaakov. Now there's a big weakness in that claim, right?
You have to answer the question then, when in history is God going to do that, and when is he not? Why didn't God intervene with Yishmael? I mean, before Yishmael was born, and tell Abraham, wait a minute, you don't take Hagar. You don't need this problem that's going to turn up. And so there's no reason.
There's no end to it. There's no end to it, right? Why don't I give you an easier example? Cain is about to kill Hevel. Chazal asked this question in Breisheet Rabbah, essentially. There is a question hanging over the story. Why didn't the Ribono Shel Olam, now that he accepted Hevel's korban, why didn't the Ribono Shel Olam just say to Cain, not only did I warn you, but I'm not going to let you get away with it. Hevel, look out. Or protect Hevel, or make Hevel stronger. There's so many questions, right? But isn't this the question that reverberates throughout all of Jewish history, right up to the present day, right? So here we are. But according to Rashi, third interpretation, you need to make it up either, he quoted from the Medrash. This is all somehow, there's a bigger, I'd say it differently. There's a bigger plan at stake. And apparently, according to the third interpretation, the Ribono Shel Olam decided to intervene here to keep things on a certain path. But there's a big weakness in that, and that is the weakness. What about all the bad things that happen in the world of Ribono Shel Olam? Doesn't step in, doesn't orchestrate things, right? And once Ribono Shel Olam is involved here, why didn't Ribono Shel Olam be involved to plant an idea in Yitzchak Avinu's head that Esav's not always cracked up to be, or some such thing, or Yaakov is deserving of the Bechor's bracha because he bought it 20-something years earlier, whatever it is, right? There's so many different possibilities. But if you say that no, the reason why he's blind is actually somehow related to the events on the lateral plane, I mean, not vertical and horizontal, I mean here in terms of spiritual versus just human interaction, yeah? It's Esav's fault, it's Esav's wife's fault, maybe Yitzchak bears some of the responsibility, but it's not about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And also that's going to play a role in, didn't say her name yet, but Rivka Imenu, which we'll talk about next week, and her part in all this. Okay, Helen was waiting first, and then Debbie.
Okay.
Questions, comments. Helen, go ahead, please.
Oh, okay, I have a couple of cardinal rules. Ignorance is no excuse of the law. Shtika kohodoya.
Yeah.
And Yaakov saying by Yushmas Davor. And Hashem being very harsh with Moshe. Asher lo kiyamta. So whether you're blind, whatever it is, you are responsible with whatever faculties you have.
Fine. For your actions,
For your admonishment to your son, not to let things slip by. Unfortunately, loss of faculties is like ignorance is no excuse of the law.
I hear
and
it.
Asher lo kiyamta teaches us this. Poor Moshe, they're driving him crazy. So he makes a mistake and he hits the rub because they're the most horrible naysayers and horrible people you akshayorim. Law is the law. Asher lo kiyamta.
I hear it. Thank you for that. I certainly hear it.
Right.
I hear it. I don't know what else to say. You're making good points. You're making good points. I mean, again, and we're looking at here in Rashi again is that there isn't a perfect answer, but Rashi's fundamental understanding is the Torah didn't just tell us a story about a bracha, which opens with, And by the way, Yitzchak was blind just for the narrative or literary, I say it in quotation marks, air quotes, literary device, so that Yaakov will be able to get the bracha, because there's something else going on. Is it something that happened before? Is it something that has to do with the future that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is orchestrating? Rivka is going to capitalize on it, etc. But right, so it's hard to know. And I skipped interpretation number 2, which we may or may not get back to. Debbie, you're waiting patiently. Go ahead. Thank you for that, Helen. Debbie, go ahead, please.
So I agree totally with most of what Helen said, and just would like to add that, our questioning, why didn't Hashem interject himself here? We're supposed to be learning. It's like when we send our kid the first time around the block on his bike and hope he's old enough to not get injured and come back. I mean, depending on the scenario, we're supposed to be learning lessons as Hashem's children on how we should live our life, instead of always having it. My dad had this phrase, man, so we don't always have to paint it on your nose. He used to tell us that as kids, that whole European sense of humor.
Sure.
And I think in many instances, that's how it goes with Hashem in terms of when he intercedes and when he does not intercede.
Okay, thank you. I have a Faith here has a question or comment. Give me 1 second.
Doesn't this phrase doesn't that every time else that's used, great support for the person
That they said Hineni. So Faith is pointing out the very fact that he answers V'emer Lav Hineni, isn't that in and of itself a great merit? He's saying, I'm ready to help. I'm ready to follow your directive, your mitzvah, whatever it is. And I think there is something there. The love that Esav has for Yitzchak, Esav in terms of kibbud av v'aim, right? And that was said that he was better at kibbud av v'aim. This is an example. So, Hineni. I note that it doesn't say Hineni avi. This is Hineni, which is a little more. I would have said maybe transactional, but maybe not. Maybe it's just contrasting with V'omer Elav B'ni, V'omer Elav Hineni. If you look in the story of the Akedah, what do we have in the Akedah? The language is a little bit different in the conversation, right? There, Yitzchak is the one calling out to his father. Remember, right? Vayomer Yitzchak Lavram Avi, Vayomer Avi, Vayomer Hineni V'ni. I'm here, my son. So it's a little bit different in terms of the warmth. Maybe I don't know, maybe making too much of it. Unless this Hineni is much more like the very beginning of the Akedah. Vayomer Elav Avraham, Vayomer Hineni. Maybe it's more like that. I don't know. This was like the Akedah of Esav in a certain way. I don't mean literally, but the idea that he has some kind of a test that's set up for him, and if he can pass, and the bar is not very high, right? It's what he knows how to do. It's what he excels at. Be yourself, fulfill your potential. The nisayon for Avram Avinu was to go against his sense of who he was, not so for Esav. Anyway, we do have to stop here. When we resume, God willing, next week, 9:15, this slot, we'll do interpretation number 2. We'll do 1. We did 1 and 3. We'll go back to see 2. Again, it's not in all the manuscripts. A student wrote it in. It's also from a medrash, or maybe Rashi originally wrote it, but it somehow got lost from some of the manuscripts. It wasn't in the first printing or a number of other manuscripts. Who knows? But it's important, I think, to see that one also. Many of us know that one, but the reason for Yitzchak's blindness, it is quoted in Rashi. It's not clear if it's actually Rashi or Talmidei Rashi who saw fit to put it in. Anyway, that's all we have time for today. For those who are going to join us on Thursday, you're welcome to do it. Apologies, I have to get to another meeting that's starting in about a minute and a half on Zoom in my office. So I'll let everybody go.
Is it
Thank
9:30
you.
or 10?
9:30. Sorry, this Thursday, 9:30 again. Back to
Thank
9:30
you.
on Thursday. Yeah, be well. Bye-bye.
Thank
Nice
you.
to see everyone.